Ma Ying-jeou stands firm on cross-strait trade deal amid student protest. Carrie Lam seeks clarification for her comment yesterday. And more satellite images of objects in the southern Indian Ocean.
Good evening. We begin tonight in Taiwan. President Ma Ying-jeou has finally responded to the protesters who have occupied the Legislative Yuan for 6 days. But Ma did not respond directly to their demands. He stood his ground on pushing ahead with a cross-strait trade pact and called on the demonstrators to take the island's future into consideration. After days of peaceful protests, scuffles broke out between demonstrators and police this afternoon when several students trying to get into the Legislative Yuan were stopped by officers. Emotions ran high as the students tried to force their way in. Student leaders frantically called for calm, reminding the crowd why they were there. We are here to target Ma Ying-jeou, not the police and not our fellow protesters. They were upset about the president's comments earlier in the day, which wasn't made in person to the students as demanded by the protesters. Ma Ying-jeou had held a press conference to address the issue, beginning by acknowledging the students' passion and concerns. But he was firm on pointing out that the occupation of the legislative building is illegal. Let us calmly think about it, he said. Is this the democracy we want? We're willing to sacrifice our rule of law? Ma insisted that much of the protesters' worries were based on misinformation about the cross-strait service trade agreement, stressing that it would not open Taiwan to imported labor from the mainland or mainland immigrants. He said the trade pact was important for Taiwan's economy and hopes people will prioritize the island's future over party politics when looking at the agreement. He promised that lawmakers will look into the trade pact clause by clause instead of having it passed as a whole package like it was done during its first approval last week. Speaking to the press afterwards, leaders of the student movement said it was ridiculous that Ma misunderstood their demands. Student representative Chen Wei-ting said they're not asking for the scrutiny of each individual clause. They want Ma to scrap the service trade deal and pass a law first to ensure all agreements with the mainland are transparent and monitored. The students say they will continue to occupy the Legislative Yuan and surround all offices of the ruling Kuomintang party around the island.
Here in Hong Kong, Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam made clear today that the government is still actively seeking public views on political reform. It comes after her earlier comment that definitive statements were made about the 2017 chief executive election at a basic law seminar yesterday. Rachel Long has the story.
At a basic law seminar yesterday, Rao Geping, Peking University law professor and a member of the Basic Law Committee, said any nominations of CE candidates other than those made by the nominating committee as stipulated in the Basic Law will not be in compliance with the law. Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam said afterwards that definitive statements about the CE election were made at the seminar. This drew criticism from the Pan Democrats, who stressed that Lam should not have said so while public consultation on constitutional reform is still underway. Today, Lam clarified what she meant by her comment. She said she only wanted to sum up the messages from the different speakers at the seminar and was not referring only to Rao's speech. She insisted that the government is open to public views on constitutional reform. LegCo President Zheng Yuxing, who also attended the seminar, said the public should not read too much into Lam's comments.
I believe, judging from the context of the CS remarks, the meaning was that everyone who spoke at the forum yesterday sent very clear messages to the public. There was no ambiguity at all about what they believe people I mean, discussion on our constitutional development should be focused on, especially as far as the interpretation of the Basic Law, the understanding of what role the Basic Law should play in this exercise.
Meanwhile, some Pan Democrats criticized the Chief Secretary's comment, saying it has increased their doubts towards the upcoming Shanghai trip. Lawmaker Sid Ho said that Carrie Lam's comment defeats the purpose of any communication between Beijing and the Pan Democrats. She hopes that Lam will take back what she said. Gary Fan of the Neo Democrats believes Lam's comment was a slip of the tongue. He said her remarks yesterday had made it clear to the public that the administration has already made up its mind on arrangements for the 2017 CE election. Rachel Ling, TVB News.
Turning overseas now, French satellites have spotted potential objects in the southern Indian Ocean, which could be linked to the missing Malaysia Airlines jetliner. The images follow yesterday's sighting of potential debris from the plane. Australia and other countries involved in the search have sent all available ships and aircraft to investigate. It's not just Chinese satellites. Malaysian authorities said today French orbiters also fed back new images of possible wreckage from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, which disappeared more than 2 weeks ago. Australia, which is the closest country to the southern Indian Ocean, where the search for the missing plane has turned to, says this might be the breakthrough that everyone has been hoping for.
There is increasing hope, no more than hope, that we might be on the road to discovering what did happen to this ill-fated aircraft.
Investigators say the object of interest is a large wooden pallet. It was also spotted yesterday by a search aircraft, which is why investigators believe they're onto something.
Part of the description was a wooden pallet and a number of other items which were nondescript around it, and some belts of different colours around it as well, strapping belts of different legs.
Planes and ships are racing to the area to get a final confirmation. China and Japan boosted the ranks of the growing operation today, committing more assets to the search. The Chinese contribution is especially significant.
China clearly has an intense interest in this search operation. I believe they had 154 people on board the aircraft, and as we know from media reporting, the Chinese relatives and families are desperately concerned with the progress of this search.
Officials also stressed today that conditions in that part of ocean will continue to challenge the operation, but pledged they wouldn't give up.
We hope that soon there'll be more information available that might help to provide some kind of closure or at least an understanding of what's happened, especially to the families of those who were on board Malaysian Airlines Flight 370.
In Malaysia, a cycle ride was held today for all 239 people on board, with many still holding out hope they would be found alive.
Russian troops used armoured vehicles and gunfire to smash their way into a Ukrainian airbase in Crimea. As Russia tightens its military control of the region, foreign leaders are visiting Ukraine to offer support and assurance. James Aitken with that story.
In what may be one of their final stands for Ukrainian forces in Crimea, a blockade at the Belbek Air Base gives way as an armored vehicle breaks into the base. The airbase had been among the last still under Ukrainian control after Moscow's armed takeover and subsequent annexation of Crimea. The assault mirrored recent events at other Ukrainian-held military facilities on the Black Sea Peninsula, which voted a week ago to secede and join Russia. In eastern Ukraine, at least 2,000 pro-Russian demonstrators flooded the streets of Donetsk and rallied towards the regional government building. Many in the city want to join Russia and have called for a referendum similar to Crimea's. Earlier in the day, Germany's foreign minister visited the same area to meet local officials. He said Ukraine's stability will depend on long-term assistance.
We know that this will not be a challenge for the next 12 months. This will be very difficult. The change in the whole society, in the economy, that will perhaps last the next 10 years.
Meanwhile, in the Ukrainian capital, there was more foreign condemnation of Russian actions in Crimea. Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper became the first G7 leader to visit the country since Viktor Yanukovych was ousted. Harper says it's time to discuss having Russia expelled from the exclusive group of industrialized nations.
I don't think it takes much imagination for you to figure out what my view on that is, but I will certainly listen to what our partners in the G7 have to say before we arrive at final decisions.
If G8 has an empty seat, we are ready to take it. My message to G7 members, it's time to build up a new global security system as quick as possible.
The discussion will happen soon. G7 members will gather next week at The Hague without Russia to consider a further response to the Kremlin's moves to annex Crimea. James Aiken, TVB News.
Well, there are new media reports out this weekend which allege U.S. intelligence agencies hacked into the email servers of Chinese tech giant Huawei 5 years ago. German weekly Der Spiegel and the New York Times have reported that the hacking occurred at a time of growing concerns in Washington that Huawei was a threat to U.S. national security. Reportedly, one of the goals of the operation was to find any connections between Huawei and the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The National Security Agency was said to have begun targeting Huawei in early 2009 and quickly succeeded in gaining access to the company's client lists and email archive. Both publications cited secret U.S. intelligence documents leaked by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden to support their stories. A Huawei spokesman said the company objects to activities that threaten network security. Well, U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama held a roundtable with Chinese educators as part of her visit to promote educational and cultural exchanges between the two countries.
My parents were not educated themselves, but one of the things they understood was that my brother and I needed that foundation. So the President and I have made education a key focus of our work over the coming years because we want to make sure that as many young people in the United States and around the world, quite frankly, have access to education.
Obama and her two daughters also walked a section of the historic Great Wall today. The family will also pay a visit to Xi'an and then to Chengdu to tour a panda preserve before wrapping up their visit.
And still to come in our news tonight. Government open-minded about compensation and landfill expansion plan. Police crack a suspected burglary syndicate. And an Oxford University singing group on a visit to Hong Kong.